Hey guys, in this video you will learn the top 35 principles for Settlers of Catan. A principle is like a guideline or a rule that, generally speaking, leads to better results. An example would be no wheat equals defeat, as having wheat is generally better than not having wheat. There's hundreds of Catan principles and I've narrowed it down to the top 35 in order from easy to advanced. So let's get into it. Principle number 1 is, unsurprisingly, no wheat equals defeat. Wheat is the resource needed in all strategies, so good wheat spots are picked early on during the initial settlement phase. Principle number 2 is get more resource production, because more resources lead to more options and thus better decisions. The most effective way to get better resource production is by building settlements and cities on more producing numbers. For 36 dice rolls, the 6 and the 8 roll 5 times on average, while the 10 rolls 3 times. So keep that in mind while playing Catan. Principle number 3 is boards increase flexibility. If you produce a lot of cards, that's good. But if you can't use them, it's not great to be stuck with a bunch of cards that don't have an immediate use, because you could 7 out or your cards could be stolen by opponents. Having boards increases flexibility, meaning it's less likely you get stuck in a situation with no options. Alright, principle number 4 is to decrease the amount of 4-for-1 trades and 3-for-1 trades with the bank. Try to find reasons to avoid this move, because you're burning almost as many cards as when you're 7ing out. Principle number 5 is to trade a lot with your opponents. When you and an opponent trade, you both improve your position and 2 others don't. The best players in the game offer around 30 good deals per game. They don't take all the deals, but it's really important to search for options and make the most of what you have. Principle number 6 is hand tracking leads to better decisions. Knowing what's in your opponent's hands is key, because it helps with knowing what trades are available as well as knowing their game plans and options. Principle number 7 is wood and brick have increased trade value in the early game. The main reason for it is that there is a limited amount of good spots on the board. Having more wood and brick increases the likelihood you can win a race towards the spot 2 players are fighting for. Later in the game there's often no spots available at all, leading to decreased trade value for wood and brick. That leads us to principle number 8, which is ore and wheat accelerate the late game. The players with the most ore and wheat are more likely to build cities and buy development cards, which are, at the end of the game, sometimes the only options left to do. Principle number 9 is to buy development cards before you take further actions. Here's a situation in which you can buy a development card and a road. If you place down the road first and then you buy a development card, you could end up with a road building. In that case, you would have wanted to keep the wood and brick to build the settlement faster. Principle number 10 is table talk works best against weaker opponents. Strong players know what they're doing and won't easily change scores. You can only present them with facts and then they will make a decision. Here are some good example things to say and situations on screen. Principle number 11 is cities are better than settlements. The first reason is that a city will double the production on your best spot, which is likely a lot more than whatever settlement spot is still left on the board. And the second reason is, based on the building cost, you'd think cities are more expensive than settlements, but that's not true. Cities may cost 5 resources, but a settlement requires additional roads as well. Principle number 12 is to block the leading player. The player with the best position is either closest to 10 points in the end, or the player with the best resource production in the early game. Catan is an economic game, so make sure to stop the player with the best resource economy. Principle number 13 is to specialize for a win condition instead of going for all 5 resources. If player A goes for all 5 resources, player B specializes for the longest road and player C specializes for the largest army, player A misses out on the most efficient points in the game. Principle number 14 is largest army is easier to keep than the longest road. The main reason for it is that the table can collaborate and give 5 roads to another player to overtake you, but if the table collaborates and gives someone 5 development cards, they're limited by the fact they can only play 1 card per turn. Principle number 15 is port strategies defend the largest army better than ORV cheap strategies. Port strategies rely on having a bunch of a certain resource and a matching 2-for-1 port, whilst ORV cheap strategies rely on having good numbers on ore, wheat and sheep tiles. Because ORV cheap is much more dependent on getting the right roll at the right time, port strategies often hold the largest army, because they can generally pay for 1 development card per turn in the late game. Principle number 16 is port strategies work better on a low ore board. It means boards with weak numbers on the ore tiles lead to problems with ore production. This makes port strategies better because they can simply do a bank trade and get ores that way. Principle number 17 is boards with high ore and wheat lead to faster games. With a lot of ore and wheat, people can city up faster. increase their amount of cards and options. This way, someone will reach 10 points much faster than on a low ore board. Principle number 18 is scarce resources lead to better trades. On this board there's not a lot of brick, with weak numbers like 3, 11 and 12. It makes brick incredibly scarce, and people should trade a higher price for these bricks than usual. Principle number 19 is don't bank trade your ores away. You'd rather bank trade another resource if you can make that happen. Principle number 20 is when you do a bank trade and you're unsure what resource to select, choose ore. Principle number 21 is know your opponent's most efficient path in the endgame. For example, blue has 7 points, 2 cities, 1 settlement and the largest army. You might think blue is close to winning the game, but that's not totally true. Because longest road is locked, outside of lucky development card draws, blue would need to buy a road, a settlement and 2 cities for 16 cards. Red in this example is on 6 points, but you'll see that red is much more likely to win the game. Red has 3 cities, 2 activated knights and 4 consecutive roads played. So red only needs 1 more knight and 1 road equaling 5 resources to win the game. Principle number 22 is board locking is good for 3rd and 4th position, but not for 1st and 2nd position. If the first 6 initial settlements are placed like this, there's no free hex spots left to place on for 2nd and 1st position, forcing them to place on the coast. In general, coastal spots are worse. What you can do to avoid this scenario as 1st and 2nd position is to place in a way that opens up the board. Principle number 23 is players who get too many points at the start become a threat and they get blocked and stolen from a lot. So what I recommend is to stay under the radar for a big portion of the game. This means not having too many points. An effective way to do this is by focusing on your toughest task first. As a wood brick player, your toughest task is building a city, so focus on that before you get too many other points through settlements, because you wouldn't get good trades anymore. As an ORVG player, you'd want to build a road and a settlement before you get too many other things. Principle number 24 is all early game actions are situational. In the past I've thought buying a city first is much better than buying development cards. And this graph shows that all early game actions generally lead to more success in Catan. On the vertical axis you have the number of turns, and on the horizontal axis the 1 stands for a win and the 0 stands for a loss. The lower the lines and the bars, the faster the mentioned action has been taken. Principle number 25 is the longer the game, the more maximum road length matters. In this example, blue has a maximum road length of 15 roads. However, if green builds through the middle, blue only has a maximum road length of 11 roads, making it possible for green to win the battle for the longest road. Principle number 26 is, the longer the game, the more likely it is the player without the largest army or the longest road wins the game. The expert consensus is that players who win army or road most often win the game. This graph visualizes the window for these bonuses and the turns these games ended on. The mean for army is around turn 60, but the longest road player peaks slightly later around turn 70. The window for the double play has long ended by that point, while the players who build to 10 have just gotten started. Principle number 27 is boards with an outer ring desert hex give more space than boards with an inner ring desert hex. And with more space there's typically more free hex spots left to choose at the end of the placement phase. Which leads us to principle number 28, by predicting your last spot you will take better first spots. Here's an example of an inner ring desert board. For inner ring desert boards, I look at the coast for likely spots that will be left after the initial placements of the other players are done. Then I select the spot that works best with these remaining coastal spots. I expect some strong weed spots to be open at the end of the game, which means I don't need to select a weed spot now. So I'd select either the 6-5-11 or the 5-9-10 at the top of the board as first position. With an outer ring desert board it's trickier, but there's more opportunity with some free hex spots opening up. But not all of them will be, so select the spot that works best with most of them. I would choose the 8-5-10 at the top of the board as first position. Principle number 29 is a project I've never shared before. I call it the Economic Value Calculator. Pretty sexy name, huh? It works like this. If you upgrade your 9-for-11 spot from a settlement to a city with 25 turns left to play, it will on average produce 6.25 resources for you. A city costs 5 resources, so you'd profit 1.25 resources. An average game of Catan takes around 70 turns, so based on how the game progressed, you can evaluate whether or not it's worth it for you. Principle number 30 is also based on the Economic Value Calculator. If you build a city or a settlement 1 orbit earlier, it's worth the equivalent of 1 resource. If you'd upgrade your 9-for-11 to a city with 20 turns to go, it would produce on average 5 resources, while it would produce 4 resources with 16 turns to go. Which leads us to principle number 31, a settlement now is worth 1 resource more than a settlement later. Consider this when being offered a future deal. You've just seen that building a settlement one orbit earlier is worth one extra resource. So when another player offers, take this trade and I'll trade you my next ore, you should keep the economic value in mind when these projects are built. Principle number 32 is, future deals are non-binding. You don't have to do it, especially later in the game. It's likely your opponent won't follow through on the promise. In the early game most people follow through, especially if you didn't have a dominant start. Principle number 33 is, positive extortion works better than negative extortion. Extortion can be done in a number of different ways. A less effective way is negative extortion. An example would be, trade me ore, otherwise I will block you. This line feels like choosing between two bad options. A positive example would be this. Hey man, I need ore. I hate to steal it from you, but if you will trade it with me, I can put the robber anywhere else. This feels a lot better for the player who might get stolen from, and is therefore more effective. Principle number 34 is, the value of a non-steal is between 0 and 1 resources. A non-steal happens when you get blocked, but the player doesn't steal from you. The value is most likely closer to 1 resource because the other player threatens to steal from you. The value of a non-block, however, is between 2 and 3 resources. Taking into account how often the 7 rolls and how many resources get blocked by the robber on average, of course there's a lot of variety with these numbers. Because one time a certain number rolls 3 times in a row, the other time it stops rolling for the rest of the game. And principle number 35 is, hybrid or be cheap is a great strategy to play in Catan. If you want to learn more about this strategy, watch this video next. But if you want to learn which strategies are even better according to this research, I recommend you watch this video next.